All right. So let me just share this really quick for anybody who has been joined us before, which is a lot of the folks here. This will be old hand, but welcome everybody to, I don't even know which number this is, five, maybe six of our Meet the Candidate series here. We appreciate Jesse O'Connell, candidate for council, joining us. Uh, just the quick run of show here. We're gonna give Jesse an opportunity to introduce himself, why he's running, kind of major positions, anything really, Jesse, that you want to make sure that we know. You're welcome to take all 15. You're welcome to cut it short and get to Q&A, however we want to run that. Then we'll have an open Q&A. I'll start by kicking it off, and then about 10 minutes before the top of the hour, we'll take the last question. We'll turn it back over to you for any closing statements, and then we'll wrap this thing up on time and let everybody get on with their evenings here. So just some basic ground rules. If you want to ask a question, just raise your hand. You can do this. You can hit the raise hand button, whatever works best for y'all. Want to make sure that everybody's got an opportunity to ask questions. So if you've got multiple questions and we've got people stacked up, we may call on somebody else first. If it's a clarification or if the question is not actually addressed, feel free to clarify and say, hey, that's not exactly what I meant, or help me understand what you meant by that. As with all of these, our goal here is to create a meaningful dialogue within the community. So let's just make sure that we're all respectful of one another. That hasn't been the case. We've had great interactions with everybody, so no concerns there. And yeah, and if somebody brigades us or whatever, we'll kick you out. But like I said, we haven't had that issue. So with that, we're looking forward to this. Jesse, again, thank you for doing this. We'll stop sharing because we'll just look at each other in the face, and then I'll turn it over to you and however you'd like to introduce yourself, and then we can kick off with questions from there.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. I appreciate it. And apologies if we get some background news. My wife is still down on the Ave, so the kids are like running amok, sort of half out of my eyesight there. And hopefully they won't literally bust into the room while I'm doing this. Good evening, everyone. I'm Jesse O'Connell. I am a dad with kids in the public schools. I have a 5th grader and a 2nd grader here at Mount Vernon. I live in Delray. I'm over on Hume Avenue, next to Christy Hart. I'm across from Steph Pavin. I'm a youth sports coach, and I'm a longtime city volunteer. I've chaired the city's budget commission. I've served on the Park and Rec Commission. I've served on the small area planning groups for both Old Town North and the Braddock neighborhood. I'm currently on the board of the Scholarship Fund of Alexandria. I'm on the board of the Dash Bus system. I'm on the board of Hopkins House, or a preschool academy in the Parker Gray neighborhood. And I do all that stuff not because I hate being in my own home after work hours in the evening. I do that because my folks raised me to be somebody that is deeply involved in your community. I didn't grow up here. I grew up in Maryland, about 2 hours north of a town called Westminster, up in Carroll County. And I was born in New Jersey. I still have a lot of family that lives sort of the Asbury Park, Jersey Shore area. Both of those places are great. Like I said, I still have family in both places, but it wasn't until my wife and I settled in Alexandria that I really felt connected to a place. I really felt like I knew where we were supposed to be, and we planned to be for a long time. And from day one, I've looked for ways to get involved. You know, my parents brought me up to, when you see something that needs to be done, like, you don't wait for somebody else to do it. You actually raise your hand, you get involved, you try to make a difference in people's lives. I went to Georgetown, and you know that Jesuit notion of being a man for others is something that imprinted deeply on me. So I have constantly looked for ways to try and make a difference in Alexandria. Confirm my speaking language. It sounds like okay, whatever. All right. So you know, I'm running for city council because I am at a stage in my life where a lot of my peers, a lot of my friends, you know, we're at a relatively same stage in terms of kids that are in that elementary school age, you know, middle school age. I think Alexandria is a fantastic place to raise a family. I think many of us on this call know that this is a great place to have kids and to bring them up. But I also see the pressures that a lot of families in the city are facing, right? It certainly starts with pressures around affordable housing and having the kind of housing that is right for your needs, whether you want to stay in the city, whether you want to sort of move from a smaller home into a bigger one. We're seeing it across all income levels, all housing types across the whole city. And I think it's something we have to take seriously. I see the pressures that we're facing in our schools. I do education policy professionally. I've spent my whole career in higher ed policy, working on issues of college access and affordability. And at various times, I've led early ed teams. I've led K through 12 policy teams. You know, these are issues that I'm very conversant on. And I see a public school system here that's doing okay, but needs to be doing better, right? We have overcrowded schools in the West End. We have schools that are not being maintained. Certainly, you know, Mount Vernon's on that list, Core Kelly's on that list. We're having struggles to retain the kind of teachers and staff that our system needs. And I think our public schools are a core part of any community in terms of what makes a place great and what makes a place strong. I'm one of the few candidates that's running openly talking about parks and rec and open space in the city, right? I don't think our parks are as nice as Arlington and Fairfax. I don't think we have as many rec centers. I don't think our spaces are as well maintained. To me, this is not like some sort of afterthought. We'll get to it once we get to everything else. I actually think recreation space is the heart of most communities where we gather. It's where we have the chance to be out and be active and be physical and come together as a community. And I want to see the city take this stuff more seriously. It just boggles the mind that the Simpson Dog Park has been closed for over a year because we had to pick a contractor that was clearly not capable of doing the job. Right? It boggles the mind that the Holmes Run Trail has been closed for 5 years, despite different sorts of resources available to us to get that open. So that's something that I take very seriously. I'm certainly running on pedestrian safety, right? My kids roam freely through Delray. They walk themselves to school in the morning. They are constantly leaving the house and going to various friends' houses. I never worry about my kids getting lost and not making their way home. I never worry about my kids encountering somebody who means them harm. I am constantly worried about my kids getting hit by a car. So sort of slowing vehicles down, respecting our neighborhoods, creating an environment where we can move around the city safely in a bunch of different ways is something that's super important to me. And then lastly, I've talked a lot about how I very much believe that local government has to do little things well, right? That at the end of the day, what local government is in control of and needs to take seriously is stuff like paving roads and fixing sidewalks and cleaning up trash and maintaining parks. The things that we see and notice every day, right? Like I know every time Mount Jefferson Playground is not mowed, like I notice it for the 7 or 8 days that you're waiting and you're watching it get hairier and hairier and hairier. And I think having a council that is attuned to the little things and is sort of constantly asking staff, like, why did we make these choices? Why can't we do this better? Why did we do this in a certain way? And how can we learn from it? I have friends over on Terret who watched their street get ripped up 1 week to put in gas infrastructure and repaved. And 2 weeks later, Ting ripped it up and it was repaved. And 2 weeks later, it was ripped up again for water line. And I sort of, when people see government not doing small, thoughtful, coordinated actions like that, you start to lose trust in government. And I'm somebody that thinks that government actually has to show up in people's lives in a big way to sort of raise the general commonwealth, right? I really do believe that programs that are there for people when they need it most are what we all owe one another. And I think it's really hard when people see little stuff being dropped, little stuff not being done well, for them to buy in and actually believe in some of those bigger projects. So I am going to stop monologuing at this point, Nate, and actually I would much rather get to the conversation, but I hope that's given you guys a sense of who I am and why I'm running. At the end of the day, I'm not running because like I have one big thing that I want to do or one big thing that I'm upset about. I am largely running on sort of a story about who I am. I'm somebody that shows up prepared. I ask questions. I listen. I genuinely like to talk to people and form relationships. And even people that I don't agree with, it doesn't mean that I don't want to stay in conversation. It doesn't mean that I don't want to find the next thing that we can work on and the thing after that. And I hope that's what I've been modeling through my campaign. It's what I'd hope to have the chance to do if I'm elected.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the intro. I think that gave everybody a good kind of primer on the policies, at least as I was able to pull them off your website and some of the interviews.
Yep.
So, I think, as you're aware, Save Delray got its genesis really with the 2525 building and Bonaventure buying, a massive swath of land at an exorbitant premium, and publicly stating they were waiting to see what our current council was going to do, specifically around zoning for housing and the intention on bonus height. And really, there was a catalyzation of neighbors here looking at that building, looking at the absurdity of what Bonaventure was looking to do, and then organizing around that. So one of the things when I was looking at your profile, one of the things that I saw was an endorsement from YIMBY, and you said that you were the only all of the above candidate. And one of the things that when we look at local, right, and YIMBY obviously being a California-based lobbying organization, our local chapter is funded out of Mercatus, which is a Peter Thiel-backed organization. So same people funding JD Vance, our neighbor down the street, aligned heavily and funded by the Koch brothers. So not exactly a liberal organization, and we could get into Mercatus and some of the indictments there. But when we look at our neighborhood, right? What we have seen clearly is a set of overdevelopment that's not driving down prices. There's not a trickle down economic value. What we're seeing is developers come in, a lot of the same developers that drove up property values in Arlington, like class cottages, that's an example, and really driving the land value and therefore the pricing and the tax base up. So maybe you can talk a little bit about why, the folks on this call, when looking at those outside influences. And when I say outside influences, I'm talking specifically developers, lobbyists, how those interests should be balanced with the needs of people who just want to live here and they don't want to, look at their tax bill quadruple because you've got the Commonwealth duplex that went up and turned a $900,000 property into a $5.3 million property.
Hey, I appreciate the points, and I do think it's a reflection of the fact that we are a desirable place to live, right? And I don't think we should ever fight the fact that people want to live in Alexandria and people want to live in Delray. At the end of the day, this is a country that believes in property rights, right? Like we have people that own homes and they're going to be able to do what they want to do with them. I take your point about outside influences. I don't necessarily see it that way, right? Every housing advocate I have ever interacted with is someone that lives here and is deeply committed to this place and is deeply committed to providing the kind of housing that we know our neighbors need across all levels, right? So you're right that some of the stuff that's being built in our neighborhood is not market rate. It's not like sort of affordable in the sense that somebody with a limited income would be able to buy it. But it's affordable for someone at some income level. And when we constrain supply, all we're doing is pushing people down from one level to the next in a way that's driving up prices for people at that level. So I do believe that by building more housing, we are generally making housing more affordable. That's different than like actual subsidized affordable housing, like what we see going in over here at the intersection of Mount Vernon and Glebe. I think those kinds of projects are important. I think the kind of workforce housing like we saw in the Ramsey Homes redevelopment in Old Town about 6 or 7 years ago, which I was incredibly proud to write on behalf of and testify on behalf of. I think that type of housing is super important. It serves our teachers, it serves our firefighters, right? And listen, if we sort of dropped a dome over Delray and said no other home could be built, no other home could be enlarged, we know what would happen is the price of all of these homes would continue to go up because it's a fixed supply and people want to be here. So to me, I don't sort of see this notion that there's outside influences trying to change our neighborhood. I think any place changes over time based on who comes in and who gets involved, right? I am incredibly proud to know all of the people that are currently involved in the DRCA and all the people that are involved in the DRBA. Many of them weren't involved 5 years ago when I first moved to this neighborhood, right? I've seen new people come in who've made a difference. I've met people that have lived here for a really long time, right? Like I have really enjoyed getting coffee with Rod multiple times to hear about his perspective on how the neighborhood has changed and the way that he fostered a community when he first came to this area, and how that has changed over time, right? I've really enjoyed getting to know people like Gail and people like Jen Atkins, who all represent different sorts of neighborhoods, sort of groups that have a different perspective on what makes Delray what it is and what makes Delray thriving. So I don't inherently see sort of this outside force trying to change what's here. I think that's the organic nature of any place, that over time it's going to evolve. It's going to be different, right? Bill Blackburn's neighbor talks about the pimp that used to pitch a tent in the park outside that building there, right? Like some of this change is good. We don't want to go back to having a racetrack in Delray. But I think all decision making is looking at trade-offs, right? So I am very comfortable when we see projects come forward to look at them and look at what we might get versus what we might lose and make decisions at that point. I don't like Nate. I want to be very clear. Like me saying that I'm interested in an all of the above approach means proposals. It doesn't mean like blank check, just like throw up whatever you want everywhere. I think we need to thoughtfully look at everything that we're doing. You framed this question around 2525. I thought that was an example of the process working, right? Like they put forth a proposal. You guys really did offer some very important, very reasoned feedback. One of my close friends in the neighborhood lives very close to that proposal. He also really engaged and offered feedback. The developer made some changes based on that. I think the project at the time that they decided to stop moving forward, I still think there were some reasonable criticisms of that project. But I also don't think building of that scale was beyond the pale for the neighborhood. And I don't like that property has sat vacant for as long as it has. I don't like that we don't really have a great sense of what might come next, right? I would rather have a project that is mostly good, that people fought to make better, that we might still have some concerns about unintended consequences, as opposed to a vacant property and an unknown future, and also the loss of the years in sort of in between where we could have had something there that could have, the businesses that could have gone in, on the ground level, the other people that could come into the neighborhood. So that's sort of how I view, some of these trade-offs.
Okay, so just clarifying on that, and then I'll let anybody else ask a question. So, in terms of the scale of the building, so we had 4 stories,
Mhm.
looking children's bedrooms and backyard. So that scale you think was still appropriate for the neighborhood?
We have plenty of 4-story buildings in the neighborhood. I don't think the height was any concern at all. I agree with you that the balconies in the backyards was like a sticking point concern that people raised very reasonable
Mm,
concerns about it. I know they made changes from what it originally was. Having talked to people, I know that the compromise that they got back was still not as far as many people would have wanted to see it go. I understand that. Look, my first place that we lived here was a condo in the Braddock neighborhood where, we sort of had a balcony that looked down into other parts. I mean, this is not a entirely uncommon sort of type of building arrangement.
mm,
But yeah, Nate, I absolutely hear what you're saying, and I sort of think that the fact that people engaged and made those concerns vocal was evidence of a process that was actually functioning the way that we wanted to.
mm,
And no one is going to be happy with everything in all ways at all times. I mean, I think that's a large part of the exercise, is trying to find where that balance point is.
mm. Okay. I'll turn it over. Does anyone have a next question here? I haven't seen a hand go up, but
I could tell my story now.
Hey,
okay.
Jim.
So, hi, I live on Bellefonte Avenue. I've
Yeah.
been here, lived in Alexandria since '94 and this property since '95. And recently, the homeowner behind me passed. She'd lived there for a very long time. I don't know how long. And it was, probably a 1940s single family home. And her property backs up to my duplex. So hers is twice as wide as mine. Property turned over, young family bought it. They're building out to the max.
Yeah.
Which is, what we have zoning regs for. But they put an ADU on the property, and I've been always pro-development. I've always supported changes in the housing code until I had one of these things go up in my backyard. So the ADU is 24 feet wide. My lot is only 24 feet wide.
Yeah.
It's 16 feet high at the back wall, and it goes up from there. It's just 1.5 stories. It's enormous.
Yeah.
And according to the code, it only has to be set back 2.5 feet from my property line.
Yeah.
2.5 feet. And my next door neighbor, he doesn't look at anything out his backyard now except this ADU.
Yeah.
And I've been going back and forth a little bit with planning and zoning because I don't think it's compliant. They're explaining to me that it is compliant. Even if it is compliant, which I think that's where we're going to end up, they're going to say, no, I'm sorry, Mr. Bender. It's enormous.
Yeah.
It's enormous. And I get it with ADUs, but why do we have to have this sort of thing on this sort of scale? What do you think about the issue of ADUs? Because I understand I'm not the only one in the neighborhood that feels this way.
Yeah. So I think I can answer this 2 ways, Jim. One, on a general level of how I think of policymaking, right? And I've been around the federal policymaking process in the higher ed side for most of my career. I am generally comfortable trying stuff, right? Like I think that trying to move forward is generally what we want to be doing when we're making policy. I think we need to consider unintended consequences as we are going about that, do our best to accommodate them and prevent them. But once a policy is in place, we still have to look for those unintended consequences, right? So in pursuing this ADU policy, if we thought that it would mostly be a certain type of structure that conformed within the regulations that we're finding, but then someone like you is having an experience like this, we have to learn from that, right? I'm glad that you're talking to the city. I hope they are actually listening, regardless of whether sort of you get the outcome to the satisfaction you're hoping from in your particular case. I really do hope the city looks at it as an example of what is actually happening. And if that's not what we want to have happen, we should correct that going forward. We should adjust setbacks. We should adjust size, right? I really do see policymaking as an iterative process of trying stuff and learning and always trying to do better. I think ADUs generally Again, I think it's a policy that can bring a lot of benefit, particularly in the context of if we have homeowners that are aging in place, no longer want to be in their full home, the chance to potentially move into a smaller structure on their property and either rent the main house, or I think there's the chance to be creative about how ADUs can make our properties more adaptive for a variety of uses. I mean, again, there's a lot of young families in Delray. We do not have a hotel in Delray. I have a friend who built an ADU, and they've been using it actually when people's grandparents come to town through word of mouth. They, do this ADU and stay there. I think stuff like that's really cool. I think it shows how a community can kind of find different ways to live with and among one another. But Jim, I want to be very clear. I very much understand that you're experiencing an adverse impact as a result of this, and I think it's important. I think it's good that you're voicing it, and I'd want to know if this is a one-off example of just terrible luck with the way that this person chose to make choices about their property, or is this a trend? Is this endemic? Are we seeing a lot of these ADUs truly be more than we intended or wanted in a way that is actually impacting a lot of people's lives? I think the last thing I'll say on this is it's very clear to me that the ADU policy needs to be adjusted in relationship to our Airbnb policy, right? I do not think we want to get to a place where we're basically creating the conditions in which we have tons and tons and tons of sort of unlicensed overnight lodging. Again, this doesn't mean that I'm completely against sort of the short-term rental stay, but to me, that's always been a market segment that we have to really be thoughtful about. And more importantly, actually enforce the rules that we have, because I do think that's another clear area where we can very quickly impact people's quality of life in a way that was not the intended purpose of the policy.
Thank you.
So Jesse, you touched on a part of a conversation we had with Aaliyah yesterday, and that was really around Airbnb. So I'm sure you're familiar with the Avenue Flats above Peace Out. So those, as you know, those were really what we categorize as workforce housing for many, many years. Number of people working in the shops and restaurants, and I know a number of people, civil servants. Dana Lawhorn used to live there. And when Bonaventure bought it, they turned that over to, it was Sonder, now it's Casa, which are Saunders and International, basically Airbnb. The price of those units has gone from about, I want to say they were somewhere in the high $8,000s to low thousands, $1,100 maybe, depending on the size. And now I priced one of those yesterday in advance of the Aaliyah conversation. That was about $4,100 a month.
Wow.
So, that's an example. When I talk about outside influence, right, that's a great example of you've got a very significant sized corporation coming in and really changing the dynamics of the housing through the amount of cash that they have. So how, as you talked, and I think a lot of the heartstrings get pulled when we talk about firefighters and teachers, but the reality of the development we've seen, in Potomac Yard, you've got 2 bedrooms that are going for $1 million rather than something that a teacher could afford. So maybe how are you thinking about, or how would you approach something like that, since you talked about regulating Airbnbs, knowing that that's eroding the workforce housing in bringing in essentially an unregulated hotel?
I don't do this because I'm the only one signed in.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
No,
I was gonna.
We squared away, Deb? You good?
Yeah, I just muted. So.
Okay, good, good. Nate, look, I think this is one of the trickier sort of test cases for this stuff, right? Because I have a significant preference for actual hotels, right? Hotels have employees, they pay people, right? They're subject to sort of use taxes that are significantly higher and creating more revenue than Airbnb, I also say that as somebody who has not ever sort of been an Airbnb traveler. I know there's sort of a cultural thing around people who really like to travel in that manner. So I'm also trying to own my own biases, and because it's not something that I intuitively look to do, I want to make sure that I'm not having preconceived notions around it. My understanding is that there have been some recent academic studies that are looking at the actual Airbnb effect of both available housing prices in urban areas across the country. My understanding is that it is not conclusive. We have not shown that it is actually driving up prices in a meaningful way. That doesn't mean that their model is working, right? I think like many tech companies of that nature, they put a lot of effort into sort of brand management, market acquisition, but not actually having a sustainable path to have that be a real business. Which is to say that I am always sensitive to I think bad policymaking is when you are making policy specifically to block out like certain businesses or certain things, right? I think that leads you down a path where you're constantly building this puzzle box to adapt to the list of things that you're trying to leave out. So I'm always a little bit reticent when we see something that's happening as a result of market forces.
Mhm.
In this case, these are market forces that are driving up prices in a way that we don't want. But I also want to be cautious that we don't use the ratchet in a way that leads to things that we don't want to see, right? Where we're actually trying to define who can be here and who can own certain types of things. But to your point, Nate, like I don't love it, right? I certainly would rather see units actually going to people that are going to be here. It's not my preferred outcome. So I know that the city has an opportunity to look at our Airbnb taxes. We're lower than DC, right? I wonder if there's a chance that we can actually increase those in a way that not only generates revenue, but sort of makes the decision point of like actually rent it or sell it to a long-term tenant versus keep it as transient lodging, make that a much harder trade-off, right? Right now, I think it's potentially a little bit too easy in terms of leading people towards that particular use. So that's one thing that I think we could look at. And then just to like say again something I said before, I believe deeply that when we make policy, when we pass rules, we should actually enforce them. My understanding is that we're not being super rigorous around actually looking at what some of these Airbnb operators are doing in terms of complying with noise violations, complying with where people are parking, complying with how many people are staying there. I really think that that's something that we should, take more seriously.
Mhm. Good. I couldn't agree more with that. Anybody have a question? I don't see any hands up. So while people are thinking, so talk to me. I'm recently COG came out
Yeah.
saying that we needed to increase our tree cover. I personally don't have a terribly high opinion of COG telling Alexandria what to do, but I'm curious, since it's been such a mandate with zoning for housing, how you would approach a 50% tree cover guidelines, and you talked about green space and rec space. What does that mean to you? Because there's
Yeah.
obviously a robust conversation with green space, our rooftop balconies green space as an
Yeah.
example, right?
No, that's a good question, Nate. So I have not seen that particular COG report yet. So I'm sort of going into this a little bit blind. My understanding is that Alexandria has made more significant progress on its tree canopy than other jurisdictions. I don't want to sort of quantify that because I don't know the number off the top of my head. But my understanding is that this is an area where we are doing pretty well. I don't know if we're approaching sort of the benchmark that you just suggested. But when it comes to tree canopy, like I want to see two things, right? I love decorative trees as much as the next person. I think it's very cool that we have a lot of flowering cherry trees in town. I'd like to see staff actually choosing more trees and both making choices available to people that are going to give us larger canopy trees over time. This has come up in the context of the fact that our city's dealing with this issue of heat islands, right? Alexandria, the West End, gets significantly hotter than other neighborhoods. The stat that sort of I've shared in some contexts is that there's days where Beverly Hills is 20 degrees cooler than Arlandria. And that's largely as a result of the tree cover, right? So there's different things that we can do in these neighborhoods to help cool them down. We can build water features, we can create shade structures. But one of the easiest things to do is to plant actual canopy trees that will provide shade over time and sort of thrive as an environment. So the city right now is doing a program where for our 275th birthday, we're planting 275 trees. And council, I forget who it was, it might have been Aaliyah. Somebody looked at it and they realized that like nearly all of those 275 trees were slated to go into either Old Town Delray or Rosemont. Like there was really not a like purposeful aspect of the policy to plant trees in the West End. So I think these are some examples of like where even as we strive to have more canopy, where we put it matters. The types of trees we pick matters. Nate, your question about what do I mean by sort of green space and open space, I don't want to put a rigid definition on it. I think we need more of everything, right? My daughter plays soccer, my son plays baseball. I am acutely aware that we need more baseball fields. We need more soccer fields. I'm a runner. It bums me out that we have relatively limited protected running trails in the city. I would love it if there was the ability to kind of do a linked up green loop where you could actually run 10 miles in the city and not be on concrete for most of it. I think we have a big opportunity in that regard when we look at the Cameron Run property coming up off its lease in about another 3 years. Like that's an area where we do have space to do something different, both when it comes to athletic space and just open space. I think it's great that the city got Winkler Botanical Preserve back, right? And that's an example of kind of a protected space that we really do have the chance to get out and enjoy. So, I think it's a little bit of everything. I liked program space, but I also like unprogrammed space, right? I think when we did the Simpson Park rebuild, it was nice that we kind of left that large area on the Duncan Avenue side that was just kind of a field that I've seen people host birthday parties in and play pickup soccer in and, drive their remote control cars around in. I think it's great when we sort of have the opportunity to let people make it their own in whatever suits their needs in that moment. And I can't tell if that was a question in the chat for me or if that was something else.
I put a link to.
Oh, thank you. I will read that later.
Arlington Now article that's got
Awesome.
got some things. I don't remember the stats. I think bottom third, if I remember right.
Okay.
But I don't remember the exact numbers here. So, in terms of, and I'm just going to keep asking questions until I see hands. So raise your.
We could have just done this on the porch, like we did,
Exactly.
I'll do a question, Nate.
Okay, and then we've got Kirk up next.
So Jesse, if I recall, you were in favor of the arena at Potomac Yard. Is that right?
I was open-minded about it, Karen. I'm not going to pretend to backtrack and be like I was against it. I was very open-minded that this could be a good opportunity for Alexandria. I did not I wanted to actually see what the proposal was, and I'm not just that was truly my opinion at the time. It wasn't just an opinion because I was running, but I certainly was not against it. If that's how you want to frame the question.
So I'm just curious what you would like to see in Potomac Yard now that the arena is off the table.
Yeah, I mean, the simple answer, Karen, is, I think something that looks like the Mosaic District in Fairfax County is the easiest Schenectady for what I would prefer to see there. I think different from the Mosaic District, I would like to see it anchored by some sort of venue. People have pointed to a performing arts venue of some sort as being a good use for there. I agree with that. I think when you look at the Potomac Yard small area plan, a entertainment district does largely conform with what we were looking to do there. I think the small area plan in its current form is still heavier on office building and is probably reasonable post-pandemic. But that close to a metro station, I do think that needs to be an area where we do have people living, but we also have people coming to eat. We have people coming to, do things that are fun and enjoyable. I wish there was a way that we could have a sports function work there, right? I think something of the scale of the arena drove the concerns that I think were very justified. And I want to be clear, I shared the concerns that everybody on my block shared about parking, about traffic. Those are legitimate concerns, and I did not discount them. I was open to seeing if we could get both the funds and the will and the policy making to address those. But, I think in this day and age, having something that draws people, right? When we look at, there are some really compelling, smaller sports venues that you can do stuff. I get why it's attractive. And candidly, I also get why it got JBG Smith off the perfectly happy to sit and print money from the Target and the other big box stores for 20 years, right? I get that you need a catalyst that is that meaningful to get a private landowner to do something different. But Karen, to circle back, I do think the most compelling thing that's actually attainable, that actually we can put the different types of mechanisms that would make it happen, would be something like the Mosaic District, because you have the chance to, sort of leverage different city resources to get something like that done. And I do think you could do it in a way that it is different than what we sort of see inside the Beltway in this part of town. To circle back to something I said before, there aren't really hotels in this part of town. I think the chance to do something in Potomac Yard where it's a nice restaurant, a nice spa, sort of, boutique hotel kind of thing, that is clearly an amenity that you either have to go south to Old Town or north to Crystal City to find, that I wouldn't hate seeing right here in Potomac Yard. All right, Nate, am I supposed to call on people or are you calling on people?
I'm supposed to take myself off and call people. Go ahead, Kirk.
Okay, thank you, Nate. Jesse, you made reference to not wanting to put a dome over Delray, and I don't disagree with that. And then it also talked about needing to grow housing, right? And I assume, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but in an effort to drive down pricing or achieve some affordable level of housing. I guess my question is, what's enough? I mean, at what point what number is that that we're trying to achieve that we're going to reach those goals?
No, Kirk, it's a fair question, and I want to be clear, and you know, and I'm going to answer this the way that I, you know, answered in the questionnaire that Nate, you know, had circulated and had me fill out. And let me also say, Nate, you know, having done at this point like 22 of those, yours was a very thoughtful, substantive questionnaire. I'm glad that you guys asked the questions you did, because my answer is I don't know that the solution to the housing pressures we feel in Delray is not necessarily putting more housing in Delray, right? It's putting more housing in the parts of the city nearby that are positioned to have it, right? It's Potomac Yard. It's getting the Braddock Road Park and the Braddock Road Metro Stop Park and Ride correct. It's doing what Carlisle should be a long time, right? By putting housing in our transit hubs, you know, sort of leaning into this notion of transit-oriented development, we're going to move demand, we're going to move attention to those places and have it not be sort of falling on Parker Gray and falling on Delray and falling on these neighborhoods that are less able to sort of absorb significant new housing. It doesn't mean that I'm also comfortable when you sort of see, you know, a lot that'll then have a duplex on it or stuff that tracks historic development patterns in Delray, right? I do think we'd see a few more units over time. But it's not lost on me that, like, you know, the most recent home start in Delray is a single family home right across the street from Strachey that's going up next to the parking lot there. So I think it's pursuing opportunities to get more housing in the city in the places that are best suited for more housing. That will meet our overall demands, but then have the sort of like downstream effect of, you know, leaving these neighborhoods a little bit less pressured by that. You know, you know, this is stuff that I've talked publicly about, right? Like, I really do believe that we are facing a housing challenge. I really do believe that it's being driven by essentially a function of our success, right? People want to be here. Alexandria is a place that gets a lot right in terms of service provided and you know, sort of wonderful quality of living, which means that people want to be here. I don't think we should ever sort of like take steps to make this a worse place so people don't want to be here. So I do think that we need to answer the call in terms of meeting that demand in a way that is sustainable and is thoughtful, and lets us, you know, sort of get where we want to be 20 years from now. It's in similar to, you know, Dana and some other people have sort of shared, you know, newspaper articles from the late 90s, you know, sort of the first time around with Potomac Yard. And it's remarkable that you see a lot of the same conversations, right? People are just sort of unsure about what's going to come next, but then decision making was put through this lens of like, well, where do we want to be, you know, 20, 25 years from now? And I think it was an example to look at, like, you know, we didn't get all of it right, but we got a lot of it right. And that's what I hope in this moment again, that, you know, we may not be getting all of this right, but I think we're getting a lot of it right. And I do think that, you know, you have the chance on this next council to have some people that are thoughtful about this and don't necessarily think they have all the right answers, but do want to sort of take a shot and listen and grow and learn and try and get more of it right than not. Kirk, sorry, I don't know if I directly answered the question.
No, you did, and I appreciate that. You know, one of the things too, in what you said, and I appreciate that too, is then, you know, as we look at other areas of the city, also looking at it as a holistic approach and realizing the overall infrastructure impact that these have, and we seem to take them in very isolated funnel decisions without really looking at the overall impact, whether it be traffic, sewer, you know, all those issues that we've been struggling with, green space, you know, all these things we're trying to integrate.
Right.
And yeah, and then, you know, and when we put these policies in place, I still can't comprehend why we don't build the measurements prior to passing these things, that we wait till afterwards, like, oh, well, we didn't want it to do that. And we all of a sudden see 50 ADUs like the ones discussed earlier, and then decide that, oh, maybe it's time to relook at this. But anyway, that's kind of a different tangent where, but anyway, I'll stop there.
Melissa, go ahead.
Hey, Melissa.
Thanks. Hi. So
Hi.
I, like you, have been in the federal policy world for a while. Actually, we share circles. And one of the things that has always been surprising to me in really good ways with federal policy is like transparency is forced. There are a number of checks along the way that make whether people recognize that this is why or not, there are a number of checks along the way that make major decisions really transparent in federal policy for the most part. I feel like Alexandria in the last couple of years, you have to be like a full-time paying attention to what's going on to have any sort of insight into big decisions that are getting made about our livelihood. Like, not I can't go to every meeting that starts at 5 p.m. and goes until midnight just so I can get that nugget that might be of interest to me. So I'm wondering where you are on sort of, do we need to change things in Alexandria about making our government more accessible for citizens to understand the decisions that are getting made?
I mean, listen, high level, my answer is always yes, right? Like, I don't think we should ever assume that we are communicating with people in the best or the proper way, right? You know, when I look at the city, I see them trying hard. I see them succeeding in some ways, but I don't think they're getting it all right. You know, I mean, specifically in the context of the arena, I thought the communication around it was generally quite poor, right? I think a lot of the proposals were rolled out in a way that didn't, particularly, I thought the transportation proposal really was not communicated very well or sort of made any kind of sense. You know, I think we have to be adaptive to thinking about the way that people are trying to engage with government. You know, I know something that has been shared recently was over the entire course of the zoning for housing discussion, the city had translators available that spoke Spanish, that spoke Amharic, and that spoke Arabic. And over, 200 people testified across 2 different periods, and nobody ever used the translation services once, right? And I think it's great that the city thought to have them, but clearly the city did not then break through in that extra step of like letting those communities know that there was a chance to engage, or candidly, understanding barriers around social capital, barriers around kind of engagement that those communities would have felt comfortable coming and participating in the first place. So I do think we have to constantly push to make sure that like the medium is like, I think like the medium matters as much as the message. And while I think, we see the message being okay occasionally, but often not great, I'm not sure we're getting the medium right. I'm not sure that sort of the balance of side. I mean, most of your point it's not only show up at the meetings. It's like I'm signed up for all the city e-alerts, and like I get so many of them. I'm just like, you can't even figure out what to wade through. So I also think when you look at one of the consistently pointed to more substantive examples of engagement is like the mayor's own newsletter. I mean, that's one guy doing that, right? Like I really do think that we have to be thoughtful about the manner in which we're sending information to people and having a chance to engage. And that will run the gamut from like sending mail to people to virtual outreach to, the city has done a better job actually trying to go out and find people. I'm on the board of the Dash bus system, and when Dash did its route redesign, they spent months actually like putting people in yellow vests on buses and at bus stops, just talking to people. Like they had like surveys they could fill out, they had open-ended questions, they actually gathered information and took all of that feedback and then put it into this proposal to redesign the routes. And that ended up being a process that people were pretty happy with. Like people really not only participated in the engagement, but I think got to a redesigned Dash network that people were pretty happy with. But Melissa, I think local government generally, like you're asking the question that local government has to constantly figure out, which is it can't only be a process that people either, are retired or have a lot of time in their hands or work from home or have the ability to be present for this stuff at the rate that it is. My earliest engagement in Alexandria was sort of, trying to answer this question of how do we get people that are younger and have really young kids and don't have time to do this? How do we get them to understand what's going on? How do we get them to express their voice and be part of this process? I agree with, I'm asking the same question you are. I'm not sure I have exactly the right answer, but it's something that I take very seriously about the importance of getting right.
No, thanks for that. And I think a point to be made about Alexandria is that we do have very policy savvy people in our community, given where we live. And a lot of us support, in theory, most of these things. But when there is a feeling of a lack of transparency, it is much easier for people who are very passionate about workforce housing. Like low wage, high value to society occupations, can't live in my community. I'm super passionate about that. When I don't feel like there is transparency into what's happening, and then what comes out of it is a supply demand housing policy without any set asides for those people I care about, it just makes me more skeptical. And then you immediately like sort of get moved into this like, oh, you're like saying there's a conspiracy theory or a deep state. And I'm just like, no, I just don't have enough insight into what is happening. And so I do think it'd be worth it, especially with the policies that you've talked about supporting here, to really look at ways of engaging the community, because a little more time on the front end, I guarantee will end up with happier support on the back end, I think.
Well, and so one of the questions, the Alexandria Times voter guide went for a couple more weeks. We all had to submit our answers by yesterday. But one of the questions they asked is sort of like, what do you see as a great resource that Alexandria has? And I swear this was the answer that I submitted. I'm not just changing this because you asked the question. But my answer was actually this wealth of experienced, experts in a bunch of different policy areas. And what I suggested is that I think we do a good job with the sort of boards and commissions that we have. I know people often joke about how many we have. But what I actually think we could have a little more of is like close-ended opportunities, right? Sort of like a task force, a roundtable, a summit, but the chance to actually bring some of these people who are highly experienced in policy areas that are on issues that the city is currently struggling with. And take time to learn from their expertise, take time to have their perspective on some of this stuff be incorporated. Again, that's not a silver bullet. That's not solving all our problems, but it is something that we can do that both drives resident engagement, that takes advantage of a resource that we had, and potentially surfaces some new and different policy solutions, or new and different concerns, because these are things that other cities have tried, other states have tried, that other regions have struggled with. I do think we have that resource in the community and need to do slightly better in terms of harnessing it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, we are at 10 minutes till. So does anybody have a question? Otherwise, I will ask one more and then we can let you do your final thoughts and everybody can get on with the what's left of their evening here. So, okay, so I've got one more. So in addition to 2525, when Save Delray got started, I know my immediate neighbors. I know, some people are new, some people have been here a long time. My neighbors next door have been here for 30 years. They chose to retire in place here and did modifications to accommodate that. One of the things that we found as we were, kind of spreading the word about what was going on and a lot of the investment that was being made in properties speculatively, was a lot of concern coming from the market rate apartments. Glendale Apartments has a number of people that have been there 10, 15, 20 plus years. Recently, the DOJ made a criminal referral against a company called Real Pages that runs most of the apartment pricing algorithms. And Washington, D.C. named, I think it's 11 operators, including all the household names in Alexandria. Alexandria seems to be very focused, or zoning for housing seem to be very focused on demand and or supply side. So all the supply side economics of it, but not looking at the anti-competitiveness. If you're on council, how do you take that view of taking people who are breaking the rules and having those adverse effects? And how would you think about those elements, not just the things that are going to affect the people's backyard, side yards, and streets?
Yeah. So again, Nate, I'm not familiar with the DOJ case. I have to go back and look at it. But, at a high level, sort of the work that I've done over the course of my career is sort of the political philosophy that kind of largely guides the way that I view the world. I think we need a capitalism that works for people, right? Like I've told people that it's sort of, you snap my finger and you made me president for a day and I had the chance to like pass a couple policies before I went back to normal. The two things I would pursue would be one, a sort of mandatory national service requirement, right? So that every 18-year-old in this country owed 2 years of service to the United States, whether that's rural health service or teaching, and sort of crucially in a community other than your own, right? I think when we look at the polarization issues we struggle with, it's because we've forgotten what we all owe one another, what this sort of common project is. But the other one is I would snap my fingers and change the tax code that basically allows private equity to exist, right? But I think the fact that we have an industry in this country that is primarily extractive, right? It is strictly just a financial mechanism that's not creating any sort of good for anybody. And I know that is a huge part of these sort of large real estate holding companies that you're talking about, right? I think that market rate affordable housing has to continue to be part of the mix here. When you look at presidential greens in Arlandria, let alone the one that you mentioned, these are a huge piece of the puzzle. And I think that the rules we have in place around making sure that those units are safe and healthy and sort of the landlords are abiding by the ways that we expect them to act are incredibly important. And, if we saw evidence that there was practices that not only were happening here, but were happening in other places, I would absolutely want to see the city take that very seriously. And I'll say, like, it's not a area of policy that I am conversant enough in that I can tell you right now what I know the solution is. But it's definitely something that I would want to get smarter on and understand what we can do to make sure that people aren't coming in and sort of treating residents of the city in a way that's both inhumane and not and contrary to the aims that we're looking to see for people that are providing housing in the city.
Okay, I put some links in if you know, I'll take you at your word and everything I've seen you write. It's definitely an area that I think the city has been very wrapped up in the supply side and building, and I think there's for people who have pet projects and want to see tax revenue, there's probably a reason for that. But the ProPublica articles are would be worth your time.
Cool. I've clicked them. They're open in tabs on my browser alongside the 37 other tabs.
All right. Well, we've got about 5 minutes left. I always like to end 1 minute early, so I'm going to turn it over to you for parting comments here, and then we'll close out for the evening.
I mean, Nate, I honestly don't have any other than to say that I very much appreciate that you guys took the time to both listen to me explain why I'm running, but also to ask some questions. I mean, I am happy to continue the chat for 4 minutes if there's other stuff that people want to ask. I said this also in the question that I turned back in, but this is not some BS line. Like, this genuinely is who I am. Even when I don't agree with people, it doesn't mean that I don't want to understand them and learn from them and talk to them. I think we often misunderstand disagreement as acrimony, right?
Agreed.
And I really much appreciate that, even though we may not have identical perspectives on some of the sort of preferred policy outcomes on things, it doesn't mean that we don't sort of share similar values around why a place matters, or what it means to sort of be a neighbor and get to know people. So that's something that I try very hard to model, and again, I'm really appreciative that this many people took the chance to come and chat tonight. And I don't think I'm going to get everything, regardless of whether I'm going to continue to be involved in Alexandria. And I don't think I'll get everything right, and when I don't get stuff right, I want the chance to talk to people so that I can constantly learn and grow and do better.
All right. Well, I think that's all we can ask. So. Well, I will go ahead and close out our session. So, Jesse, I want to thank you for taking the time to engage with us, to fill out the questionnaire, answer questions here. I'm sure there's a lot of demands, but hopefully this has been a good session. I think we have been Thursday. We've got Charlotte Schur at 7:30, Karen, 7:30. I don't have my calendar up.
I think it's 7:30, but we'll send out a notice.
We'll send out the link tomorrow, so be interested to see what she says. But Jesse, thanks again for the time. And if there's anything that you want to send out to the team, to us, we'll happily forward it on to anyone. So
fantastic. And I will just also close with the offer of it is easy to find me, whether that's in person or whether that's over email. And please, I encourage people, if there's stuff that we didn't cover that you want to ask about, please reach out. I'd love the chance to remain in conversation.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
All right. Take care. Yeah. Thank you.
Cheers.